Hello friends, welcome you to the SMUS MOOC on Universal Design, Accessibility Planning and Social Inclusion. This MOOC has been created under the Global Center of Spatial Methods for Urban Sustainability at the Technical University of Berlin, funded by the German Academic Exchange Services, that is DAAD. This module and this MOOC has been curated under the aegis of Laboratory of Inclusive Design at IIT Roorkee. My name is Professor Gaurav Raheja and I am a professor at the Department of Architecture and Planning at IIT Roorkee. And to carry forward the conversation from the previous module, session A, which is module 1, session A, in this module, we shall now be focusing and moving forward in the introductory session of Universal Design, Accessibility Planning and Social Inclusion towards demographics. Understanding demographics and some concepts around it basically imply that we must focus on a broader dimension of the human selves while talking about the larger environment in which they exist. It is important that this relationship is well understood by virtue of few basics so that irrespective of our various professions and personalities, we are able to contribute into our environmental inclusivity as a broader approach and concept. Let's have a look at what this world looks like in numbers. Now, these numbers could be slightly dynamic because as the world is dynamic and every day these numbers are changing. So it's more like a concept that we are trying to build here is that if we look at the world as, let's say, 100 people, how would you cluster them? How would you understand people as together? And this gives us a perspective, if I could illustrate on this, that there could be a perspective of age on which one says that 26 people aged in 0 to 14, which is, I would say, the young age, the children age, 66 people aged between 15 to 44, which is the adult age group, and 8 people aged at 65 plus, which is elderly. It is to explain that if age is one parameter, we are perhaps going to move forward with different kinds of parameters. This is one. Likewise, gender. Of course, there are other genders as concepts as well, but this image currently talks about male and female as the only genders. So it is even a representational error as the world is moving. In terms of continents, which is regions of our spread, in terms of area, in terms of languages, in terms of housing, there are so many dimensions in which the world can cluster its people to understand the whole demographic range better. This brings us to a word which I want to introduce to all of us is the word called intersectionality. Because every human is at some intersection. He has a age, a gender, a regional affiliation, a economic status, a society and culture. And if you start grouping all people of the world in some way or the other, we will realize that it is important and crucial to understand each individual's or a collective group of individuals' needs so that as a larger built environment we could cater to them. As we move forward, on the basis of occupation, on the basis of their work position, it is crucial to see how the world is divided here. And here we are talking about what do the 7 billion people of the world do? And it says 1.4 billion people work in agriculture, 800 million work with industrial jobs, 577 million are older than 64, the age of 64, and around 1.9, let's say around approximately 2 billion people are too young to work, which we would group in the category of dependent population. At the same time, there are around 430 million people who are unemployed. We don't know what is the future of employment with artificial intelligence also moving into the space of assistance and with 400 million people as entrepreneurs. The important dimension of this is to understand how humans are engaging on a day to day basis by virtue of the occupation, by virtue of the society that they represent. And for this world, we are talking about the built environment and the social environment to become more accessible and inclusive. So, if we further look at this, 15% of the world's population experience some or the other form of disability. 15%. And 80% of these persons with disabilities live in so called developing nations. Friends, many theories populate that there is a very strong linkage between disability and poverty as well. It's a very complex linkage. And therefore, 177 countries have ratified what is called as the UN Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities, popularly known as the CRPD. So basically, 177 countries or even more have actually come together to agree and accept the idea of this convention of providing equity and equitable opportunity to people with disabilities across the world. One third of the 58 million children out of school have disabilities. These are World Bank report data. 50% to 75% lower employment rates for people with disabilities. Now, all these things start creating a certain gap between the human and the environment in which we function. This leads to what? It leads to a form of experiencing what is called as exclusion. Now, looking at it from the lens of children, around 1 in 20, you know, for example, now 93 million children, or 1 in 20 of those aged up to 14 years or younger, live with a moderate or severe disability of some kind. Children with disabilities are 22% less likely to have improved sanitation facilities in their household, is what the UNICEF data states. And these are glaring numbers. Further looking at this, 40% of these children are less likely to engage in early stimulation activities and 30% less likely to read books or be read to be at home. And this brings us a question of inclusion with reference to education. And likewise, if you look at our larger environments divided or grouped on the concept of occupations or functions, we would say housing, education, workspaces, places of public interest and recreation, etc. The question will be, how do we determine that how inclusive they are, how accessible they are, whether they are inclusive or not. And as long as we find the answers to these questions, as if it's a yes, let's emulate this as best practice. If the answer is no, let's start working towards it to understand what are we going to do with it. So it brings the whole subject also to another paradigm, which is called disability in low resource contexts. Many of the global south countries, friends, represent a low resource context. Low resource also represents low income, low economic opportunities. And with these complexities, when disability emerges in these nations, we have to deal with it by innovation. So it says that disability is a major cause of social exclusion, and it is both the cause and consequence of poverty. 500 million disabled people are undisputedly amongst the poorest of the poor. These are very concerning numbers. 500 million people with disabilities. So if you look at this, this brings us to a point of another word which I would say is scale of the issue. One thing is that we start learning, okay, how do we create an environment, what are the human needs, and we work on this at an individual level. But one of the major complexities here is that the scale is humongous, and there we have to respond to this. And therefore, we need to take support from many disciplines, including social science, including policy, including architecture and planning, including design, including technology, engineering, information, and so many other dimensions as well. Let's have a look at the demographic perspectives of India. This is an old data because the census is yet to be taken under a new law that we have. But the old data also says that around 2.21%, which means around 26.8 million persons with disabilities live in India. These numbers, as per United Nations, are high underestimates. Because these are numbers when in Indian earlier law they were considered only 7 kinds of disabilities. By the latest law, which happened in 2016 as a revision of the previous law, it is now counting 21 categories of disabilities. So this must bring an enhancement in the numbers of identified people with disabilities, and it is estimated this number must be around 10% or even more. Now, the World Health Survey estimation for the years 2000-2004 said that disability prevalence in India was 25% higher than the global average, as stated by the WHO. These are also concerning figures because as the world is advancing in technologies and various other manifestations of human evolution, it's concerning that the disability, the disease, and many other human aspects or demographic aspects need to be paid attention to. As far as the elderly scenario is concerned, you'll find that this number is also slowly on the rise. India, as of now, continues to be high on the lower age group, but it is emerging towards that direction where elderly population is also on a growing side. Even though it's not as much as what the European, Canadian, and the American and the Japanese global north countries have, but it is still a sign of concern that how are we going to look at our environment so that we are able to provide better care, support, assistance, access to our elderly population as well. Also looking at the subject of gender inclusivity or gender equality, well, as per the data from the World Economic Forum 2021, it says India is now ranked 140th among 156 nations based on the various parameters that are considered in them through the various lenses of economic participation, education, health and survival, and the political environment. So, in order to move forward as part of this module, let's also introduce you very few but very basic concepts and definitions. The first one is to understand that India is one of the nations representing Global South. While Global South as a concept is emerging to describe the grouping or clustering of countries along, as I said, socio-economic and political characteristics, and which is why it's becoming slightly relevant to therefore study, research, and innovate between the Global South to Global South regions, while we can always learn from some best practices of Global North as well. So, to also further understand what do we mean by accessibility? Friends, they are all English words right now, but it's very important to understand the context in which they are used. So, as of now, from the UN context, accessibility is about giving equal access to everyone. It's an experience, it's a feeling, it's an approach about bringing equity to all in broader context. But at the same time, in different other contexts, it can be defined in different ways. It is used to describe the degree to which a system is usable by as many people as possible. So if you say, is your chair accessible? Are you accessible as a person? Is your room accessible? Is your building accessible? Is your city accessible? Is your street accessible? These are scales of context in which this word accessibility can be understood. Looking at these as examples from products, which is a product of design, engineering, and with a very specific focus. For example, on the left hand side, we see the Braille calculator, and on the right hand side, we see a flip open cap. So the Braille calculator works for people with blindness as an instrument to do calculations, mathematics, but using a sensory language called Braille. On the other side, flipping open a cap is possibly inclusive design of a bottle for keeping maybe medicines or any other products, but using a thumb. So people with lack of grip or otherwise could perhaps be used by all others also, uh, bringing a dimension of better accessibility or greater inclusivity into the product itself. So likewise, we extend from these products to built environments like these, which is a public realm, an entrance on the left hand side, and we see a street with the shop front and the walkways on the other side. This explains the term accessibility in a built environment. Whether you access by a ramp or you access by steps, these become barriers and kind of challenges for people who have to move on wheels. Looking at it further, social inclusion, what does it mean? Social inclusion refers to the process of improving the terms of participation in a society for people who are disadvantaged on the basis of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, and economic and migration status. This is coming from the UN Economic and Social Affairs reference. So, if you understand it this way, social inclusion has a very critical word called participation. Because participation brings a degree of dignity, it brings a degree of independence, it brings a dignity, it is associated with a human aspiration. And that feeling of being accepted and being included is very crucial. And it does depend on, therefore, the environments that we create. So, if we look at this on the whole, the various dimensions of social inclusion may include the status of human abilities, the location, which could be geographic, climatic, one's gender as a concept, one's ethnicity, one's religion, the status of employment, sexual orientation, and even many others. I'm just linking all of them to say that we need to therefore understand this these intersections amongst the dimensions of social inclusion in order to be able to address it through our design processes. So, if you look at it in a more visual way, this is the example of inclusion where people with diverse and special needs are part of the larger group and can participate. When you put them together and segregate by drawing these lines, they become the idea of exclusion. And when you put them together and basket it in one section and further divide them like this process is called segregation. While if you put them together but within the larger included whole, this would be called integration. So, inclusion is a desirable goal, but if you gently understand this as a very basic concept, you can at least start looking at the environments around you and raise these questions in your own mind. I think this way of engagement will perhaps make it more relevant and interesting for us to see how we can apply these concepts in the real life. Now, coming to the word universal design, what does it mean? In the picture, friends, you're seeing Mr. Ronald Mace, the late architect, who is considered to be the father of this term universal design. What Ron Mace said was that universal design can be defined as the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. He coined this term many years ago. He was an architect and was also a wheelchair user. He was sensitive, and his whole intent behind doing this was to give the world a direction to emerge from a stigmatizing approach of disability towards a more inclusive approach to that. So he said and he meant that therefore recreating a positive terminology is very crucial to build the whole notion of universality. And therefore it meant it is design which works, usable, and is extended for a larger population group, addressing the dimension of scale as well. At the same time, on his footsteps, further theories were evolved, and this is Professor Ed Steinfeld from the State University of New York at Buffalo, who further extended this definition as the latest 2012 update is that universal design is a design process that enables and empowers a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, and very importantly, social participation. Because of the word social participation, I think we need to connect with another word, which is context. So please see, friends, that Both definitions are relevant, I would say, in today's world. But you also have to see how the world in the global north is also evolving these definitions and making them even more inclusive. From the idea of products and environments to be usable to the idea of embedding it into a design process that enables, empowers, uses a very constructive language here to improve human performance, not just talk about accessibility, it's saying a step forward, human performance, health and wellness, and social participation. For example, a metro with extended platform and tactile ground surface indicator, which is this one, which we call them as TGSI, and there's a person with blindness using a white cane as a stick interfacing to move and step into the train, which has the same platform level and the car platform. You'll find these kind of technological innovations of extending the floor and covering this gap makes it safer. Are small examples of how in the environment we are intervening with various aspects of design innovations towards the effort of making it a more universally designed facility, but it enables at the end a human participation to move. This empowers the individual. So I'm just trying to explain this is the definitions that we have seen. And if you start seeing any image, any experience in the real world, you can actually start analyzing. So coming back to these three keywords, we will revisit the definitions. Universal design is a design that works for everyone in all scenarios and with every contingency, while accessibility is an attribute, a quality that makes an experience open to all. An inclusive design, a human-centered design process that embraces diversity. With this understanding, friends, we are kind of wrapping up at this point on what did we learn throughout this module. In this module, we learned about the need and relevance of social inclusion from the lens of demographics, and therefore we could connect with the term accessibility planning and universal design on the larger whole with a perspective of Global South. So now we shall move forward to the module 2 as the next session, and we shall see you there for understanding diversity and disability as a concept in the next module. So coming up next is session 2A, focusing on disability. With that, I come to the conclusion of this module 1 session B, and see you later in the module 2 session 2A. Thank you so much for a very patient listening and look forward. Bye bye.